So, welcome to the webinar. This is the RSA 2026 recap. I'm your host, Paul Roberts, director of editorial and content here. This is a webinar where we're going to talk about things like AI trust, software supply chain security, and what's coming next in the information security space. Based on what we all saw at the RSA conference. With us in the studio, I'm really excited to have two amazing guests who were, interestingly enough, also attendees at the RSA conference. I'll start with Robert RSnake Hansen. Robert, say hi. You are the CTO at a firm called Root Evidence. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I've been in computer security for 30 years now. I've been doing it longer than anything else, and primarily came up in the web application and browser security space as a penetration tester and a researcher. And I've kind of graduated into more of the executive track with more of a focus on network security. So kind of transitioned about halfway through my career.
And entrepreneur as well.
Oh, of course. Yeah, we started a couple
Yeah.
companies. We sold Bit Discovery to Tenable, and now we're started Root Evidence.
Okay. Okay. And with us as well, my colleague Charlie Jones. Charlie, you are a director of product management here at ReversingLabs, and also importantly, co-author with me of the Software Supply Chain Security for Dummies book. And we did a little book signing. We did a book signing with Robert for his book, which we'll talk about, and we did one with Ferrari. So, Charlie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I always joke that Paul is the real author here. I'm just kind of riding on his editorial coattails. Yes, I'm a senior director of product management at ReversingLabs. Previous to ReversingLabs, I led the supply chain security proposition at PwC, where I worked in both the US and the UK. I was over in the UK for about 6 years, longer than I expected to be. Had two kids over there, and then recently, about a year ago, moved back stateside. So good to be home, but also good to be here today and chop it up on one of my favorite topics, which is software supply
Yeah.
chain security.
And actually, you're in California. You went from UK to CA.
I know, yes, UK to CA, a lot sunnier in the Bay Area than it is
Yeah, I was
around
going to
here.
say that is a big shift. And we didn't mention Robert. You didn't promote your own stuff, but you are the author of this book, AI's Best Friend, which we did a book signing at RSA. And for the folks who are on the line here, we've actually got, for 10 of you, we have free copies of Robert's book that you will be getting as a thank you for attending our webinar. So stay tuned. We're going to do a random selection, and you will get a notification. You'll get a copy of this book, which is awesome, in the mail. Okay. So to kick things off, again, we were all out at RSA. I was there. You two were there. Robert, Charlie, we've all been to RSA conferences before. I think I went to my first one in like 2004 or something, when it was still pretty crypto focused. Give us a sense, if we were to sort of look at the 30,000 foot level at this year's RSA conference, what was your and Robert, I'll start with you and on this. What was your take on it? And if you had to say, for the audience in a sentence or two, here's what I took away from the show. Here's what the big, what I thought was most meaningful about it. What would that be?
Well, I think the major takeaway I had was that everything is AI. And I don't mean that in a positive way. I mean it as in everyone had it, and so it wasn't particularly interesting or unique or whatever. It was more just like, it's like everyone having a login page or something. It's like, well, yeah, everyone has that. So like, what's unique or better about yours? And so I think it lost its luster significantly than the previous years, when it was sort of more new and fresh and not everybody had it. I think we've sort of reached a bit of a tipping point that it was a very different mood about AI, I guess, from everyone I talked to.
Interesting. And we'll dig into that.
Mhm.
Charlie, what are your thoughts? What did you take away?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree. AI was everywhere. It was overwhelming, to be honest. Like you walked the showroom floor, every single booth had AI in their messaging. What's more interesting to me is actually the flip side of that, is how do you, as an enterprise, which are seemingly walking around the booth and procuring security tools or investigating in security tools, how do you govern the proliferation of AI, right? You know it's everywhere, but does your business have a way of systematically discovering it, tracking it, setting up guardrails to manage it in alignment with your organizational security policies? And almost every single conversation I had, specifically with analysts, I think I had 6 market analyst meetings at RSA. Every single one flagged that that was a major issue that enterprise CISOs were bringing up is how do they avoid this explosion in shadow AI, knowing that security vendors are just embedding AI into their products that you're consuming as a downstream enterprise.
Yeah. I mean, this is having been to many RSA conferences or other conferences, but RSA, I think it's particular this way. Like in my experience, there is a feature of RSA where whatever the kind of hot term or technology is, security firms, many of whom are small firms, right? Because it's an industry that is really dominated by small companies, not very large ones. Well, in terms of numbers, not in terms of revenue. And they all kind of run to that, right? Whether that's, I mean, I can remember back in the day, like virtualization and big data and like whatever the
Blockchain,
buzzword of the
Web
day.
2.0.
Blockchain, yeah. Like every year it's like something different, right?
Yep.
And yet I feel like the glomming onto AI is just substantively different than the sort of lemming effect that we've seen in other years towards whatever the hot tech SaaS, or whatever is the hot technology. What are your thoughts? I mean, what is this? Is this just security companies being lemmings and being like, oh yeah, well, we have to be relevant, we have to talk about AI, so we're just going to put it on our booth and put it in our marketing materials, but like what, there's no real there. Or is a transformation actually happening?
Yeah, I think it's both, which is unfortunate because it's a little hard to tell which is which. In certain industries like SaaS, I think it's transformational. I think it really is moving the needle significantly. In fact, it might actually make SaaS good because I don't think SaaS was very good before when it was
Right.
just a rules engine.
And this
Where
is
I think,
SAST, SAST, static
yeah,
application security testing, not SaaS,
yes,
software as a
right,
service.
correct. Sorry, yes, for those who don't know the
Or
difference.
just wanted to make. Go ahead.
But in many other cases, it's just a Me Too feature, and it's probably not the right software to do the job. It's kind of just hacked, thrown in there to, make some process that's already kind of easy. So like just different, not necessarily easier. It adds expense, it adds complexity, adds slowness. It's just like the wrong tool for the job for almost all cases. But SAST is allowed to run slow. It's allowed to miss things. It already has missed things. It's allowed to have false positives. It already had false positives. And so like it's kind of like a really good like addition to its kind of already kind of weak standing in terms of its capabilities. I know a number of people who feel extremely bullish that SAST is going to actually be good, based on the new revelations of what it's possible to do. But everybody else, I gotta tell you, it was like, oh, we'll have it for like runtime analysis or whatever. I'm like, no, you won't, or at least not really in runtime. Otherwise, you're slowing everything down to crawl. Like nothing's gonna like, or we do wire
Mhm.
speed, blah 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 blah. It's like, no, you don't. I mean, you might pull off the data at wire speed, but you're not analyzing anything at wire speed. Like, no way. You're like, it's way too slow, way too expensive. You're not doing that. And so it's like you got to really understand what it is and what it's good for and what it's really not good for. And a lot of the use cases, frankly, the companies are just not well set up for it. Like using it for development or using it for like marketing websites or something, fine, right? I mean, everybody could take advantage of that. But in terms of baking it into your product, I don't see a ton of use cases where it's like really critical and it really is solving a massive problem that they couldn't have otherwise solved with a Spark rules engine.
Right.
I, I was gonna,
Charlie, thoughts?
yeah, as you were talking about, like it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous. People are kind of glomming onto it. I was listening to this and I had to look it up again to make sure I got the name right. His name's Scott Belsky. He is the chief strategist at Adobe. He did a really interesting podcast where he was kind of drawing parallels to this period of time. It was like 400 million years ago, called the Cambrian explosion. It was all about this short period of time where you had this massive increase in these different series of life forms and different varieties of species. And it feels like that, right? We have artificial life, right? And drawing parallels to AI being embedded in every single and thrown at every single possible problem, like Robert said. Um, from a vendor perspective, I honestly feel like it's out of pure necessity to feel like you are with the crowd, right? You see a lot of massive kind of market valuations for companies that are AI first, and so everyone wants to ensure that they have AI in their products to make sure they have a higher market evaluation. They want to make it seem like they are doing what is on the cutting edge compared to their competitors and draw differentiators. It can make your product workflows much more efficient, but to Robert's point, you have to think about, is it actually solving the problem that your customers are
Right.
having, that the market is
Right.
having, and
If
not
it's
just
allowed to be slow, it's allowed to be expensive, it's allowed to have false positives, it's probably going to do a pretty good job. But there's so few use cases that kind of fit that specific set of requirements. So,
Right. And Charlie, I mean, is kind of building on what you said, not only are companies that are native AI getting huge valuations, but companies that seem to be in the crosshairs of AI, including companies like CrowdStrike and so on, have seen their stock, and Adobe, actually, I would say is another one, have seen their stock price drop precipitously because there is this notion of like, oh, well, this company is, on the way out. AI is gonna render this, which is, again, I don't think particularly always that well informed based on what those companies actually do and their
there,
capabilities. But you know,
I mean,
there's a
but
comment.
there's also another problem. We talk about this. We also run a fund called Grossman Ventures. It's a small startup fund, but one of the things that people come to us with AI stories all the time, and we've come to the conclusion that AI is not a moat. It really isn't what people think it is unless it's trained on really truly unique data. And then you can actually have a moat in the same way you could have a moat on any unique form of a database that you're taking some information out of, let's say. And the reason for that, the reason why it's dangerous as an investment is because of this thing called the great middling, where these large language models keep training on themselves. Like people produce data, they put it on the internet, and then it trains on that internet data, and it just keeps this vicious cycle. And therefore, all of the edges where like unique information get washed out by virtue of the middling increasing, and because it's a
Mm,
stochastic engine, the middle
mm,
is overly represented compared to the edges. The edges are where all new information comes from, all controversial information comes from. And unless you're like a marketing genius and you can just force it into the public sphere, it's never going to get into the middle, which means that everyone is basically getting the same product, which,
mm.
turns it more into to a deterministic thing as opposed to what it's supposed to be. Like
Right.
I know what data I'm going to get out of an LLM because it's going to contain the word delve and significantly and highlighted and whatever because of the great middling.
Right.
Numbers that start with a one
That's
and a
slop.
nine.
Right. Right. I mean,
Numbers that start with a
that's
none
country.
and a nine are much more likely, or a two and a zero are much more likely than a nine and a two, or a four and a one, or whatever, because
Right.
19 something, 1900, 2000 are dates, and they're in lots and lots and lots of documents. So like,
Interesting. Right.
it's just very dangerous if you don't have unique data.
So, Robert, you were talking about this, which what you called one of our earlier conversations, the trough of disillusionment
Hmm. Hmm.
of the
Yeah,
infosec sector with AI, um, and that kind of speaks to the sort of the hype curve, right, and stuff like that. So that after you've dropped off that, you're in the trough of disillusionment, I guess.
right.
Um, what what do you think is fueling? What are the dimensions of that? What's fueling that? What in your mind has come up short or disillusioned people
Mhm.
around, the impact of AI on the infosec
Well, I think a lot of people
industry.
hadn't tried it before, and now a lot of
Hmm.
people have tried it. And they're like, great, this is awesome. You go through that initially, like, this is amazing. I'm getting incredible results. And it's great for like for when I'm trying to muddle through an idea and I'm like, I kind of mostly know what I want to do, but I'm just struggling with how to structure it or whatever. It's wonderful for all those types of use cases, creating content. I mean, it's amazing. But then you actually try, if you're actually an expert in something and you try to have it construct something for which you are an expert in, you're like, woof, this is not expert quality. This is pretty bad, actually. Now it can do it fast. It's like that joke, I can do math fast, and you're like, what's 400 times 71? You're like 83 or whatever. Like that's not
Yeah.
right. Yeah, but it's fast. You know. It's like that. It's like
Very, very fast.
it
Wrong,
produces a
but
ton of data, but the data is just, kind of garbage. And so and I see this on some websites, some actual security websites, like they'll have like a page and I've been in this industry a very long time and I cannot parse what's going on this page. And then I get like three-quarters of the way through it and I like start seeing all this like obvious LLM stuff in there and I'm like, oh, like it's not like the experts who wrote this are writing above my pay grade. It's that no one wrote this. Literally, no one's ever edited this or looked at it or
I was
whatever. It
going to
was
say,
just
and more
just
importantly,
thrown up
nobody
there.
edited it, right?
No,
Yeah,
they
right.
just threw it right on the internet. And so,
Yeah,
who is that document for exactly? And I think so. Once you start using it and actually seeing the results, I think you go over that cliff and you're down to, woof, there's a lot that's bad about this. But then,
right.
I talked to the SaaS guys and like they went through all that too. And they're like, no, no, no. Actually, there is something to this. They're coming out the other side going, oh, there is some really interesting stuff here. Like you have to know what you're doing. Yes, it's garbage in many cases, but we know how to control for a lot of that garbage and still make a useful product out of it. And so
Hmm.
I think there's two groups of people I talked to that were like most in this trough. So the first were the analysts. They're like, we don't want to take a single meeting and not even one more press meeting or presser or whatever about AI. We're like completely AI'd out. Like it all sounds the
Hmm.
same. It's garbage.
Hmm.
We don't want to talk about it, right? So that
Hmm.
was that was pretty meaningful because I bet that's what almost everyone wanted to talk about on the show floor. And then the second one, and I didn't have to talk about it. I wasn't there to talk about it anyway, but they were like giving me cautionary, like, don't do it. Like, and then the second one was we were talking to some VC partners and people who might want to invest in things. And we were talking about some AI related things. Like, and at the end of the meeting, they're like, thank God this wasn't another AI pitch because like they all sound the same. I don't know how to tell them different. I don't know how to evaluate them differently. I don't think there's a moat there because they all look exactly the same. So this is coming from like sort of the bellwether parts of our industry that decide where things are going to go in the public sphere,
Right.
and none of them want to talk about it. They're like, woof. It's just they're completely inundated. So I'm not saying there isn't something there, and actually something Charlie brought up in a previous call that we had. I thought was really right on the money. The things that they do want to talk about is how do you control it?
Right.
That is what they're much more concerned with. It's like, okay, now that we have all this garbage out there, how do we protect ourselves from it?
Yeah. Charlie?
Um, yeah, I think, like I said, one of the biggest themes that I found from people was how do you govern this once we already know it's out there? There was this
Yeah.
really interesting anecdote. It was an article I had read about how universities or colleges were banning students from using AI in the classrooms. I think Paul, I had talked to you about this,
Yeah.
and students being very creative in nature of figuring out workarounds. We're essentially going out to Chipotle has a chatbot on their website that is used for general purpose. You can ask it anything essentially, and so they were asking it questions. And it's like
Yeah.
kind of a funny anecdote, but like imagine that playing out in an enterprise environment. Like people will find ways and the tools that they need to get their work done. And so you have to understand like where is my data going? How is it being shared? And there are no shortage
Right.
of tools out there that people can use in
And
game.
internet tends to route around damage. I had an interesting conversation with a guy at a very large company last night. Just I was at a bar just chatting him up, and he said, we're almost to this point. We're not quite there, but it's coming, and it's coming fast actually, where the executive team is going to ask a question of the middleware that is going to instrument the LLMs. So like you're making a request, it goes through middleware, then it goes off. So they have a way to instrument it. And they're going to ask questions like, why did you use this long prompt? Like, why are you doing it in this way? Can you reduce the token count on this? Did you really need to ask this question 10 times? They're going to start like micromanaging your token
Sure.
utilization
Yeah.
because it's a huge expenditure and they just don't have the tooling yet. But as soon as they get that tooling, they're going to be really asking some hard questions of the developers who are just spamming the thing with just huge context windows that are frankly not necessary to do the task. And so there's going to be this massive sort of movement to optimize token utilization and prompt like compression and all this kind of we talk about this in other like API utilization sense, but we never really talked about it in the AI sense. But I think that guy's right. I think that's
Yeah.
coming. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, there are so many companies that are, promoting AI solutions with regard to, cybersecurity and everything else. And like you said, Robert and Charlie, in many cases, it's just kind of white noise. However, and I probably liken this to maybe what it was like with like the railroad industry back in the 1900s, right? Like there are a few really big players. When they make announcements, it actually matters because they have the resources to actually make it happen, right?
Mhm.
And we saw one of those actually just within the last couple days, which is we had an announcement from Anthropic about this new project called Glasswing that picks up on a lot of what we were saying. It's a collaboration with some major players, AWS and Google and CrowdStrike and Palo Alto, basically using this kind of new Mythos preview model to do application scanning and find vulnerabilities and then obviously address them. I wanted to just bring that up and throw it out there as to okay, when Anthropic comes out and makes an announcement about cyber and AI, that's in a different category. And they've been dropping jaw. They've just been announcing some pretty amazing stuff pretty consistently. What are our thoughts about this Project Glasswing announcement and what we think the impact of that is going to be?
Well,
Robert, start with you.
so like I said, SAST, I think that is one of the better use cases for it, and this is SAST. It's
Yeah.
and I think a little bit of DAST. Like they're gonna do runtime stuff as well. They're gonna have like built-in fuzzing logic and stuff. But it's closer to SAST in that context where it's operating on local machines and trying to find things. But also I think DAST is a nice target for it as well. I think it go after both of those things. The so let me tell you the good part about this. First of all, I think it'll probably work. I don't think it'll find everything. I think that's nonsense. In fact, I don't think it'll find the kinds of vulns I used to specialize in, which are the things that don't have CVEs associated with them many times and
Right.
aren't software bugs. They're like logical flaws in how the whole thing is kind of constructed. Like clickjacking isn't exactly a flaw in that sense where you can go fix a thing and it's done. You have to disable cross-site request forgery and any sort of like pulling in stuff in iframes. Like it's just a very hard fix. It's not something it's going to find, right? So I think from that perspective, it's not going to be a panacea. But I do think it's going to be good. Now, I have a couple of people who are early access or know a lot more than the average person about this, and they say it's very good, comma, it's certainly not. Well, it's not the thing that's going to freak everybody out. It's certainly better than the average that we have out there. But there's a lot of people working on this. In fact, I'm in a LLM offensive LLM group, and they have much of the same tooling already in different contexts. In fact, the only thing that's slowing them down is that the LLMs have neutered themselves, not because the tooling isn't there. It's the LLMs that have intentionally slowed themselves down.
Mhm.
Um, but but I think our take at our company is that it won't matter at all. This is big to do about nothing, because what's going to happen is the adversaries are going to have access to it eventually, or they're going to build one of these offensive tooling things I was just talking about with local models that are uncensored or whatever. And
Right,
yes, it'll find new vulnerabilities, but they don't need new vulnerabilities. They already have
right,
20-year-old vulns that they're still using. They don't care about a yet another CVE. There's 320,000 of them to choose from if they need one, right? It turns out there's a very specific type of vuln that they care about. And it's not the kind that people tend to think about. It's not always CVSS like 9 and above. Like a lot of them, some of them are down to CVSS 4 or below, and they have no score at all. They don't even have a
right,
score, let alone
right,
critical. And so I think that, like, if you think about the way botnets work, adversaries are very loath to go make any change to their botnet because they know it has a potential of taking them offline, and they don't want anything taking their botnets offline. So much so they won't even change the amount. So they have like a fast flex DNS that they can choose like which DNS servers they want to go to. If one of them is compromised or goes offline or whatever, they won't even push a patch to remove that one, because even that runs the risk of taking the whole thing offline. They'll just let it lie, like, okay, who cares if I lose a certain amount of traffic? What they don't want to do is just start throwing new vulns in this thing all the time. Like that's like opposite of how they think about things. They want everything to be routinized and make as most amount of money as they possibly can. And as I said, they have this massive backlog of 300, and actually I think it's more now. I think it's closer to 340,000 CVEs. There's plenty of CVEs to go around. I don't think a new explosion of CVEs is going to improve their ability to break into things. That's not the problem
right.
they've got. They have other kinds of problems related to what happens when they break in, and how do they pivot around, and how they get the exfil the data, how do they sell the data. Like they have many other sort of bottlenecks to monetizing that have nothing to do with the initial access vector.
Kind of an embarrassment of riches. And your colleague at Root, Jeremiah Grossman, had a really interesting LinkedIn post on this today, sort of highlighting some of the same issues,
Yeah.
which is, when you look at the actually, vulnerabilities that lead to actual exploitation and theft of data, it is a
Mhm.
tiny percentage of the
Oh yeah,
overall
yeah.
population of vulnerabilities. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, uh, Charlie, anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, it's funny. I've seen a lot of hot takes on social media the last couple days on this topic. And I think it ranges everything from there's some that I've seen that are like this is just kind of marketing ploy to drum up some feeling of exclusivity by only releasing this to a certain set of secure partners, right? All the big players in security have it. I want it too. To the other end of the spectrum, which is cybersecurity tooling is dead as we know it. And it's going to replace everything. Now, I kind of tend to fall in the middle, right? Favor the positive notion that actually this is Jen Easterly wrote a really interesting article that I tended to kind of agree with and enjoy reading. It's a really good read if anyone wants to go read it. She posted it yesterday, but she was kind of talking about how this
On
is
on LinkedIn.
on
Also.
LinkedIn, yeah, how this kind of slow release, this beta release, is a rare occurrence of constraints in an industry where you have a leading organization like Anthropic that has the potential to dominate a market with a very new, powerful model. That's the new sexy thing that everyone wants. But they're showing constraints in that they're taking the deployment of it much more seriously. And so Glasswing is really a recognition of progress, not in just LLM capability, right? I think they had talked about how there's in their initial announcement that they improved the detection of CVEs by 20% or something along those lines. But more importantly, it's a demonstration of progress from an industry leadership perspective, right? They're breaking the mold and breaking the pattern of mistakes that the traditional software industry has faced which all follows this mantra of like move fast and break things, right? There are economic incentives that are skewed towards market speed for a software vendor, and inevitably that leads to poor software. So I think this is actually a point of progress here. Um, to Robert's point, I agree. I don't think this is going to solve all our problems. Something we've actually been beating the drum at Reversing Labs for the last couple of years, and I actually spoke about at the RSA conference back in 2023, so 3 years ago, is this kind of hyper focus that the security industry has on vulnerabilities. And Mythos seems to be incredibly powerful and effective at identifying vulnerabilities very fast. They even talk about in their announcement, they've now found a number of zero-day vulnerabilities that have never been discovered before, thousands of them within the course of a week. But as we know, vulnerabilities are not the only thing that impacts the software supply chain. If we think about some of the most high-profile attacks that have ever occurred, either dating back to 2020 when SolarWinds occurred, or even in the last few weeks with this PCP attack campaign on a number of open source packages, it is the results not of security flaws or known vulnerabilities in software that are captured by a CVE. It's malware being implanted directly into the development pipeline of a software publisher or indirectly into an open source package where a maintainer account is compromised.
Mhm.
So my hot take is that Mythos and Glasswing aren't going to fix everything. It isn't a single silver bullet. And that may be enough, right? Like if vulnerabilities make up 70% of the issues and you can address all of them immediately, find them, then sure. But if you really want to take a comprehensive approach, you need to think about all those other types of risks and threats, whether it be a type of coding error or safety issue like Robert talked about that isn't captured by a CVE, or something more nefarious like an actual strain of malware embedded within a package. You need to take that more holistic view.
Right. And we're going to get into the supply chain thing in a second. Just we're coming, past the halfway point. I wanted to just throw it to the audience here. If you got questions, use the Q&A feature on Zoom. You might have to click on the more button to access it, but we'd be interested in hearing whatever questions you got. So just take advantage of that. We'd love to respond to your questions. So one of the, and this will kind of, I think, sort of be the final kind of AI focused question, but I mean, there was a really interesting talk at RSA. Chris Wysopal from Veracode chaired this panel that had Dave Eitel, who's at OpenAI, and Kelly Shortridge from Fastly, and Daniel Miessler, who is at does the unsupervised learning newsletter. If you're not a subscriber to that, you definitely should be. It's really fascinating. Look into what's happening in AI. But they had this panel called Gen AI Code in the Wild, and kind of a CISO's perspective on, what to do about this, generative AI code and applications that are just kind of mushrooming everywhere. And, kind of one of the big takeaways was that, again, AI wasn't producing bad code so much as just revealing how bad the code baseline is. The baseline that AI has trained on is incredibly flawed. The vast majority of legacy code out there is incredibly flawed, created by humans, obviously, over the past 40 years. And that, maybe one of the things AI can do is to kind of help clean that up by kind of, like we're talking about in some ways with Glasswing, revealing, identifying the exploits, maybe empowering, folks within an organization to be able to review code at scale and fix issues, whereas before that was just incredibly resource and time intensive and just didn't happen. And that maybe the role of developers in the not distant future is more editors, right? You're going from writing code to sort of editing code that AI is creating. So anyway, that was sort of the takeaway. I'm interested, Charlie, maybe start with you and kind of what your thoughts are on that.
No, it's a really good point. I think we've talked about it a little bit already. We know these large global enterprises are still operating decades old technology, as Robert said. And as a result, they have decades old exposure. So, to your point, Paul, I think what AI is very good at is finding those issues faster, cheaper, more efficiently. What AI cannot do yet is replace, again, this is a concept that Jen Easterly brought up. I don't want to take credit for it, but it cannot replace your organizational discipline to actually remediate those vulnerabilities, which in many cases takes cross-functional alignment across not just the development team, but the team that is managing the actual infrastructure globally across multiple regions of the world, across multiple organizations, if you have subsidiaries as well. You need to develop a fix, you need to test a fix, you need to ensure that that fix does not break any underlying functionality in the application, and then you need to deploy it across kind of complex and interdependent and interconnected systems that may exist within your business, but partner businesses as well. So it's not as easy as just finding it as one part of the issue. I think AI helps with that. Actually remediating it all the way to where it's usable again is another. So that human in the loop certainly isn't going away. So the question is, can you maintain that discipline to fix it at pace? Because malicious actors don't have as many steps, right? They have the same capabilities as you to find the issue, and they actually have the same capability to build an exploit to take advantage of the issue at incredibly fast speeds. So the question is, can you keep pace with that and actually have discipline to carry that through in a streamlined manner?
Yeah, Robert.
Well, I'm a little surprised that Chris Weisopel didn't call BS to some degree, at least on the current state of AI and software security, because his company produced an interesting research paper, and I don't want to misquote the stat, but it was something like 45% of code generated had vulnerabilities when Veracode went over it.
Yeah.
And I don't see any reason to disbelieve that, because every time I look at code that is produced at any scale that AI produced, it's got serious flaws in it. And I don't even do that type of research anymore. And I'm just like, whoa, that's a really nasty issue that you certainly did not catch. But there's the future state too. The future state is, okay, AI isn't as sloppy. It's trained on better things. It's got skills that are well vetted as opposed to just things you download off the internet. And can do a better job of building secure software, or asking the question, like, do you really want this to be insecure? Like, we'll do it, but it's bad. Now, I want to take a big like comma and add it to the end of that, because I think there's a big additional problem here, which is that once upon a time, it took a certain level of expertise to even get a piece of code online. That expertise is gone. It takes
Yeah.
no expertise now.
Yeah.
Effectively, I have trained kids that are like 8, 9 years old to write software. Just asking questions of, Cursor or whatever. And these are fully functional video games they could easily put online and play or whatever. You know what I mean? Because that's what kids care. That's what they want to build. Um, that is terrifying, because if even a small fraction of those make it all the way to the internet and actually get played by other players and start being consumed or whatever, no one has ever done an audit on that. I haven't done it on it. The kid certainly hasn't. Cursor's default model hasn't.
Sure.
I'm just telling you, the problem isn't so much that it develops bad code, it's that it develops bad code that can be pushed to prod. Like, it has gotten good enough at pushing code to you that is usable enough that it makes it all the way into prod. And that is
Right.
the problem. Because if it was just broken code and it didn't work at all, then you'd be safe. It'd be fine. It wouldn't go anywhere. But it's actually the thing it's really good at is producing functional code. That's not good. Because
Right.
if it was non-functional and insecure, no big deal, but it's functional and insecure, and that's the real problem.
Right. I was saying Rakib notes in the chat about this Google research that also talked about the potential for, um, you know, uh, basically planting malicious code out onto the public internet in open source, repos or whatever, with the goal of kind of poisoning the whole, agentic chain as it moves forward, right?
So,
I mean,
so
that's one issue too, is like if we can manipulate how these language models are learning, potentially you can predetermine outcomes that you want. You can sort of think very holistically about
that
how
that
to
is
how
that
to
is that has been a problem from day one. For instance, OpenAI, forget how someone figured it out, but there was like 70 something sites they were training off of at one point early on. And some researchers went through and actually did some analysis. And I think like again, I don't want to misquote, but it was something like six websites were gone. They didn't work anymore. So you could just re-register them, and now you can publish whatever you want, and
yeah,
now it's in
yeah,
the training data. And that's not even including things like persistent cross-site scripting, like comments on message boards, and all this other stuff, ways to get to inject data into these sites. And I know a lot of sort of gray and black hat SEOs, and this is exactly the kind of things they specialize in. And
sure,
now that they've seeded enough data in enough places, now they can tell where the LLM is pulling data from, and they can focus their energy in those places. And so much so, like some of the guys I talk to feel very confident that they could make anything rank within the LLM anytime they feel like it. It's just a matter of how much effort they really want to put into it. And so for them, it's not with the intention of injecting malicious code. For them, it's marketing a Rolex or whatever they're marketing, right?
hmm
But but it is like this much difference, you know? It's just a
zero,
different
right? I mean,
payload, right?
right. If a malicious actor pursues that same goal, but with the
Right,
idea of getting you to engage with
right,
some malicious content, then
right.
right, the results can be the same. Um, okay, so yeah, I would say obviously AI just dominated the whole conference. I'd say the other big trend that you definitely saw was just a growing consensus that software supply chain security is now really at the center of the sort of risk landscape, as opposed to 10 years ago when it was a real kind of you know niche problem, niche case. You just didn't see it that much. But no longer. And we're seeing, both on the open source side and commercial software, just risks, multiplying. Robert, I know when we talked earlier, you were just talking about how this growing supply chain risk is really just putting, organizations in the crosshairs in a way that they're not very well prepared to address from a monitoring, detection, prevention standpoint. Talk just a little bit about that. And did you see anything out at RSA that gave you hope or optimism that actually, soon companies are going to have the tools and technologies they need to, lock down their supply chain and not be vulnerable to the types of compromises that we've seen with a Shai-Hulud or what have you?
So it's good and bad news as far as I'm concerned. So this
Yeah.
reminds me of something that already happened once, which was APIs. Before APIs, everything was on box, and you could sort of isolate it, and if anything bad happens, it was because of your code, and it was nice contained thing, right? But as soon as we started using APIs, and we're using APIs all over the place, and APIs with a new hotness. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was a thing for a while.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I was just sitting there looking at the whole thing, like, and I was watching the code that was being produced, and it was kind of like the AI slop we see now. They're like, oh, I'll just inject this API, and I don't have to think about how it works. I'm like, whoa, well, what if the API goes away? What happens to your code? They're like, oh, I guess I should probably have some use case if this thing fails. I'm like, you mean if it fails? You mean when it fails? The internet's really weird. It goes up and down all over the time, all over the place. And what if it injects bad data just accidentally? What if it's broken? Like, what happens? And like, oh, I guess I should have some. It's like they just weren't even thinking that anything bad could happen. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you're crazy. Like,
Yeah.
and some of the
It's
the
like a
voting.
CS class. Like, well, I did the assignment. I did what you asked me to do.
Yeah,
Right.
you're
And
right,
it's just
right.
like,
And so
yeah, well,
it's done and dusted. Someone already has
yeah,
an API for this. It's like, whoa,
right,
whoa, you're in for a world of hurt when that thing goes
right,
down.
right.
And so I think we learned some lessons along the way. We still didn't learn how to roll credentials, but we got most of the availability stuff, I think, kind of mostly figured out. So we're doing the same thing with LLMs. We're doing the same thing with supply chain. We're doing like all the same problem all over again. We have no idea what we're consuming. We're just throwing it in there. It's all very questionable code, and who knows what happens if it goes bad. And there's no real constraints. Okay, so that's the bad news. But the good news is I think a lot of people are starting to move back to sandboxing. Like, oh, maybe we should put this in a sandbox. Maybe we should have compartmentalization for this. Maybe I
Mhm.
shouldn't just give this thing unfettered access to my personal machine and all of my data. Like there should be a little bit more control around all this. And so I personally am I'm feeling I've heard the word sandbox used in many different contexts just in the last handful of days that are giving me some like, oh, wow, people are starting to understand like maybe you should use seatbelts. Maybe I should put this thing in a container of some sort. Maybe I shouldn't give it full unfettered access to all my IoT network. It sort of makes sense when you say it out loud, but like they're starting to actually build real technologies to actually kind of make this a little easier, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Um, so we got one question I wanted to ask before we switch over to questions. First of all, Charlie, anything to add to what Robert said?
No, I think he covered it, especially
Okay.
conscious of time. If we have questions, I want
Yeah, yeah.
to answer those.
I think one of the other things, sort of subplots that I saw, or sub themes that I saw at RSA was, of course, and this is actually pretty consistent every year, is the sort of regulatory landscape, and what the industry can expect in terms of regulations and requirements, mandated requirements. Obviously, this year, federal government had a much lower profile at RSA than it has in years past. And yet, there are a number of initiatives either pending or enacted that address cyber, whether it's on the federal government side or across on the other side of the Atlantic, the EU, where we've got the Cyber Resilience Act, NIS2, DORA, all kind of starting to take wing. Charlie, I know this is a topic that's close to your heart. What is your sense on the sort of regulatory compliance front, especially around some of these issues like software supply chain security and AI and stuff like that?
Yeah, don't get me started. I may never shut up about ethical, regulatory, mandatory
You have
requirements. We could talk about
2 minutes.
it forever. Okay. I think the key thing to realize is that there is no longer a single stakeholder responsible for this burden of software supply chain security. I think Robert actually talked about it at the beginning. Like everyone used to say, like, this is the vendor. The vendor needs to do this. And for years, it's been a finger pointing exercise, right? This vendor got breached because they didn't take secure by design seriously, or
Right.
this open source maintainer didn't use MFA on their account. What were they thinking? Well, now we have this whole spectrum of legal, regulatory, mandatory requirements, to your point, mostly concentrated in Europe at the time, at this point in time, that are actually enforceable, but that say you have obligations to meet software supply chain security requirements, whether you're a publisher of software, that you're selling software to the open market in a commercial route, you're an enterprise buyer of software, like the Digital Operational Resilience Act, which says a financial service
DORA.
provider must test commercial software for malware, tampering, secrets before they deploy it to production. Or in certain cases, even if you're a steward of open source software, which the Cyber Resilience Act now covers. Um, the other theme that we're seeing, going back to our AI and ML discussion, is the extension of all these software assurance requirements and methodologies that exist in these regulations and requirements to now capture AI and ML systems as well, whether they're embedded within software or operating as a standalone system. They're being appended to these legal and regulatory text. You talked about the US federal government and the National Defense and Authorization Act. It
Yeah.
has this very explicit linkage to, okay, we know SBOMs have been a valuable tool to gain insights into the makeup of the software package. That same concept should be extended to AI and ML systems as well. So an extension of who is obligated to meet these things and who they're being levied against, but also an extension in terms of what kind of digital assets it covers, going beyond open source to now commercial, as well as AI and ML as well.
Right. And the NDAA, obviously, that applies to defense contractors. Companies are selling software and services to the military, but of course, as we know, the military is a very large customer with a lot of money, so those tend to have ripple effects. Robert, I know you talked when we talked earlier, sort of expressed some skepticism about whether these EU rules will actually be able to impact or influence where the tech sector is going, particularly with the momentum behind that companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google and stuff have. Do you think this? Well, how do you see the industry kind of responding to these? Is it just going to be talk to the hand, and we're going to keep doing what we want to do, or is there going to be some kind of compromise, like with the Apple's USB-C 3, right? I mean, clearly, sometimes these regulations do have the desired impact.
I think I think if you're talking about physical products, you can regulate them and the industry will comply. Because
That's the USB-C thing, yeah.
USB-C thing, I come up with a bunch of other examples of that, like seatbelts on cars, for instance. I mean, there's some
there we go.
examples, positive examples. In the case of the internet, it's almost always not a good idea, because all you really do, like I said earlier, the internet routes around damage, and censorship or regulations or anything like that is all considered damage, and it has to route around it. And so I was talking with the CMO of Facebook, as a good buddy of mine, and he said that they're going to spend, the FANG companies are going to spend something like $1 trillion over the next, 5 to 10 years in physical infrastructure. And that physical infrastructure, $0, not one penny is going to go to Europe because of the EU regulations, because they know that they cannot train those models on EU anywhere in the EU. And Great Britain, the whole thing. But they can do it in the United States, and there's reasons they can do it in the United States. If the United States adopts a whole bunch of new regulations, well, then they may have to go somewhere else. They may have to go to China. They may have to go to Russia. They may have to go to some very unregulated island nation somewhere. So I don't think that it's a particularly great idea to spend in this area, to spend time trying to regulate it, if you want the economic advantage of it. Losing $1 trillion in economic value to a country is a monumental loss, or to a region. It's unbelievably huge amount of data. I mean, you see people celebrating when they get billion-dollar contracts. People throw a little mini parade over it. $1 trillion is an enormous amount of money that will not reach the bulk of the European Union. And it's not like the models won't be trained. They will be trained. So now the question is, do you get to use the models? Well, the answer is, I don't care. Use them wherever you want. But we can't sell it to you if you're claiming to come from the EU. So now even the value you would get out of using something that's been trained somewhere else, you don't get that either unless you're using a VPN or routing around damage. Again, you have to get around the regulation to get the economic advantage of having this thing trained. I think it's really poorly thought out legislation, and frankly, I think anybody who's seriously considering this as a real deterrent has got to understand that the adversaries treat things very, very differently than everybody else. Our industry is quite different.
Okay. So we get a question before we wrap it up. This is from Doug. How best can you prevent employees sending proprietary, confidential PII info to public models, access to the vendor use of AI? That includes the use of abstracted data to train public or even vendor or private vendor models. Who wants to take a swing at that? Robert?
No, go ahead, Charlie. Go first.
Okay. I was going to say, I think it really starts with discovery, right? Having a fundamental understanding of where is AI being used in vendor products that you're acquiring. We run across that issue every day, and there's a couple of artifacts that are emerging as very helpful that we actually support at ReversingLabs. One is an ML bomb. So if you extend that concept again of a traditional software bill of materials, which will tell you the components and dependencies which make up your software, An ML bomb will tell you what machine learning models are embedded within a package. And then you can do kind of red team exercises on that to understand if they're safe and whatnot. But there's also a SaaS bomb. So what cloud native services is that software calling out to or reliant upon to operate? And those may be AI services, like is it calling a chat GPT API? So making sure that you understand what is in the software, what models are being leveraged, so you understand where AI is actually being used. And you need to make sure that discovery exercise is deeply integrated with your third-party risk and your procurement processes so that as software is onboarded with AI capabilities, you can well understand them and well manage kind of access permissions in alignment with your organizational security policy. So what's leveraging AI? Are there bi-directional data flows occurring so that you can manage the data that flows into that and actually make decisions before you ever give it to an employee in the first place? So preventatively is how I would recommend doing it, right? Don't give AI capabilities to an employee and knowing that application is going to be used with sensitive data to support some specific business process that requires PII, PCI, PHI, whatever it may be, without knowing it first so that you can govern it adequately. And then as the nature of that product or the service that is being procured changes over time, reevaluate it throughout its life cycle to say, okay, has it introduced new capabilities that leverage AI? In which case we need to reevaluate what type of data that we're putting into it. And if you're not comfortable with that, that's it for their applications that are already in production, then think about compensating controls, right? Tokenization of that sensitive data that allows you to still use it in a safe manner. Access controls, network segmentation, other system level restrictions like Robert talked about before. There's a number of ways to retroactively bolt on security, but I think proactive security controls are better.
Yeah, I would agree with every word he just said. There's a company that we're looking at called Assuri that handles quite a bit of the things we just talked about. They're very early stage, but it's exactly that. It's middleware. It's, data comes in. You can say no. You don't get access to this MCP, or not right now because a bad utilization time, or sure you can, but this other guy can't for a variety of reasons. We want to keep those things isolated and segmented, or not in this very specific situation where you just ran this other command like no, or only read access, not write access, or whatever. Like I think that's putting human-like controls in the loop is a really smart design choice. I think that is the way to go. Yeah.
Okay, so we're at the end. Before we break, just wanted to point you to some relevant resources, some important information. There's also some links in the chat. But importantly, 10 of you, as we said, are going to randomly be chosen and receive a free copy of Robert's book, AI's Best Friend. There's some other free resources out there, including RL's own Software Supply Chain Security for Dummies book that you can access from our website. And we've got our Software Supply Chain Security Report for 2026 and a really good CISO's Playbook for Commercial Software Supply Chain Security. Again, those are all available on our website. Check them out. They're very relevant to the things we're talking about here. Robert, Charlie, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. And, it's almost like, you don't even have to spend the money to go to RSA. You can just tune in something like this and get the,
Exactly.
Yeah. So thanks very much. And thanks everyone for joining. Give us a good review and we'll see you again next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.